When I refused to sell my phone to fund my sister's brunch trip, Mom smashed it into my mouth until my teeth bled, so I made sure they'd never touch my life again. Have you ever tasted the specific metallic cocktail of lithium, copper, and your own warm blood? A flavor profile so distinct and horrifying that it permanently rewires your brain to associate the sight of a cracked screen, not with a repair bill, but with the sensation of your teeth loosening in your gums like chiclets in a shaken box. That specific iron-rich taste was the sensory punctuation mark that ended my childhood, the physical manifestation of a lifetime of being the spare part in a family machine designed solely to keep my older sister, Bella, running at full capacity while I was stripped for scrap. To truly understand why my mother, a woman who volunteered at the church bake sale, wore cardigans, and posted inspirational quotes about kindness and grace on Facebook, every morning would take a device I had paid for with hundreds of hours of backbreaking manual labor and use it as a blunt weapon against my face. You have to understand the terrifying economy of the Miller household. It was a microcosm where love was a finite resource, stockpiled and hoarded, and I had been operating at a severe deficit since the day I was born. I was the mistake, the oops baby, born 5 years after the family was supposed to be complete, arriving at a time when my father's small contracting business was beginning to flounder under the weight of bad investments, and my mother's patience had already been exhausted by raising her golden child. Bella was the sun, the moon, and the stars. She was a pageant girl from age 4, a cheerleader, a social butterfly whose every whim was treated as a royal decree. I, on the other hand, was the background noise, the utility player expected to fetch water, carry bags, and stay out of the frame. I grew up wearing clothes from Goodwill that smelled of other people's detergent, while Bella got new seasonal wardrobes from the mall. I worked summers mowing lawns and cleaning gutters to pay for my own school supplies and field trip fees, while Bella was given a credit card for emergencies that somehow always included trips to Sephora and brunch with her friends. I accepted this disparity because when you are raised in a cult of personality, you don't realize you are being brainwashed until you try to leave. You think that serving the idol is your purpose. My attempt to leave, or at least to draw a boundary around the one thing I actually owned, was the catalyst for the violence that would finally set me free. The conflict that would eventually leave me bleeding on the kitchen floor didn't start with a shout, but with a whine, the specific, high-pitched frequency Bella used when reality failed to bend to her will. She had decided, on a whim fueled by Instagram influencers and a delusional sense of her own importance, that she needed to go on a girls' trip to Tulum for her 24th birthday. This wasn't just a vacation. She framed it as a spiritual necessity, a week-long excursion of brunch, beaches, and expensive cocktails that she claimed was vital for her mental health. After she quit her third entry-level marketing job in a year because the boss was toxic, Reed expected her to work. The problem, as always, was funding. My parents had finally hit a wall. Their credit cards were maxed out from paying for Bella's last car repair. She had rear-ended a parked car while texting and covering her rent because she forgot to save money from her last paycheck. The bank of Mom and Dad was technically closed, but the vault door was still cracked open, looking for assets to liquidate. I was 20 years old at the time, living at home while attending community college and working 2 jobs, one unloading trucks at a warehouse from 4 a.m. to noon, and another waiting tables at a diner in the evenings. I was saving every penny to move out and transfer to a university where I could study graphic design and finally breathe air that didn't taste like disappointment. I had just bought myself a new phone, the latest model with the high-end camera and the fastest processor. I didn't buy it for vanity or to scroll TikTok. I bought it because my old phone was a brick that couldn't run the design apps I needed to build my portfolio. It was the first expensive thing I had ever owned, a sleek slab of glass and metal that represented 6 months of double shifts, blistered hands, and skipped meals. It was a symbol of my autonomy, a tangible proof that I could provide for myself. I kept it in a rugged, military-grade case, treating it with a reverence my parents reserved only for Bella. I remember the night the target was painted on my back. I was sitting at the dinner table, exhausted from a 10-hour shift at the warehouse, my muscles aching, just wanting to eat my pasta in peace. Bella threw her phone onto the table, an older model with a cracked screen that she refused to fix, and announced with a dramatic sigh that the trip was off because she was broke, humiliated, and the only one of her friends not going. My mother immediately went into crisis mode, her face crumpling in sympathy. She didn't comfort her daughter with reality. She didn't suggest getting a job. Instead, she began scanning the room for a solution, her eyes darting around until they landed on me, or rather, on the brand new phone sitting next to my plate. The campaign to strip me of my asset began subtly, with the kind of insidious, dripping gaslighting that makes you question your own selfishness. My mother started by making offhand comments about how flashy my phone was, how it was too much technology for someone who just went to school and moved boxes, implying that my ownership of something nice was an act of hubris, a betrayal of my station as the humble servant. She would sigh loudly when I checked my emails, muttering about how some people were obsessed with screens while her poor Bella was suffering from depression, a diagnosis my sister wore like a designer handbag, pulling it out whenever she needed to manipulate a situation, but discarding it when it was time to party. Then came the direct requests, framed as logical redistribution of family resources. You know, Daniel, My mother said one evening while I was washing dishes, a chore Bella was exempt from because of her sensitive skin. Bella could really use a phone with a professional camera for her trip. She's trying to be an influencer, and you know that could be a real career for her. You're just doing homework. Maybe you could trade with her just for the trip or permanently. You could sell yours and give her the difference for her ticket. It's only fair since you live here rent-free. I froze, the sponge in my hand dripping dirty water. I stared at her, reminding her that I paid the electric bill every month, that I bought my own groceries, and that I handled all the yard work. I wasn't living rent-free. I was paying in labor and cash. I told her no. I told her clearly and calmly that I needed the phone for my design work, that I had earned it with my own money, and that Bella's vacation was not my responsibility. My mother didn't yell. She just looked at me with a cold, disappointed stare, the look of a gardener discovering a weed in her prize bed, and said, "I didn't raise you to be so greedy, Daniel. Family helps family. You're acting like a stranger." The tension in the house ratcheted up over the next week, transforming our suburban drywall box into a pressure cooker where every silence was weaponized. Bella stopped speaking to me entirely, walking past me in the hallway with tears in her eyes, performing a tragedy for an audience of two, my parents, who ate it up. My father, a man who had long ago surrendered his spine to keep the peace, pulled me aside in the garage while I was taking out the trash. He tried the man-to-man approach, putting a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Danny," he said, looking at the floor, "just do this one thing. Your mother is a wreck. Bella is miserable. It's just a phone, son. You can buy another one later. Peace in this house is worth more than $800. He didn't seem to understand, or refuse to acknowledge, that it wasn't about the phone. It was about the principle that I was allowed to exist as a person with boundaries, that I was allowed to have something that couldn't be cannibalized for Bella's happiness. I held my ground, locking my door at night, keeping my phone in my pocket at all times, feeling like a prisoner in a home where I was increasingly viewed as an enemy combatant. I overheard them talking late at night through the thin walls. My mother's voice was shrill and angry, complaining that I was hoarding resources, that I had become arrogant since I started making my own money, that I needed to be taught a lesson about gratitude. I didn't realize that the lesson she had in mind involved physical violence, but looking back, the signs were there, the slammed cupboards, the aggressive way she chopped vegetables, the simmering rage of a narcissist who is being told no by an appliance that has suddenly developed a will of its own. The explosion happened on a Tuesday morning, a day I had taken off from the warehouse to study for a final exam. I was in the kitchen making coffee, the house quiet, or so I thought. I assumed everyone was asleep or out. I was stirring sugar into my mug when Bella walked in. Her eyes were puffy, her hair a mess. She looked like she hadn't slept, or perhaps she had spent the night crying to manipulate the atmosphere. She poured herself a glass of orange juice and stared at me, then at my phone, which I had foolishly plugged into the kitchen outlet to charge for a few minutes while the coffee brewed. "I found a buyer," she said casually, taking a sip, "for your phone. Kyle said he'd give me $800 cash for it today. That plus Mom's credit card points gets me the flight and the hotel." I looked at her, confused, and then horrified, realizing she had already brokered the sale of my property behind my back. "I'm not selling it, Bella," I said, my voice calm but firm, trying to de-escalate. "We talked about this. It's not happening. Tell Kyle to save his money." She smashed her glass into the sink. It wasn't an accident. She threw it downward with force. The sound of breaking glass was a prelude to the violence to come. "You are ruining my life," she screamed, a tantrum that summoned my mother from the living room instantly, as if she had been waiting in the wings for her cue. My mother stormed in, wearing her bathrobe, her face contorted. She didn't look at the broken glass. She didn't discipline Bella. She turned on me, the source of the distress. "Give me the phone," she demanded, holding out her hand, her face twisted into a mask of absolute, unyielding authority. "I am sick of this selfishness. I am sick of this bickering. You are going to sell it, you are going to give your sister the money, and you are going to apologize for upsetting her." I reached for the phone, unplugging it from the wall, but I didn't hand it to her. I moved to put it in my pocket. "No," I said. "It's mine. I bought it. You can't take it." That defiance was the trigger. My mother lunged at me. It wasn't the slap or the grab I expected. It was a feral desperation. She grabbed my wrist, digging her nails in, trying to pry the device from my hand. I was a foot taller than her, stronger from lifting crates all day, but I was held back by a lifetime of conditioning that said, "You never, ever hurt your mother." I tried to pull away, to retreat, saying, "Mom, stop, stop," but she was relentless, screaming that I was an ungrateful parasite, that I owed them everything for the food I ate and the roof over my head. In the struggle, we backed into the center island counter. I managed to wrench my hand free, holding the phone against my chest, turning my back to her to protect it with my body. That was when she lost all control. She grabbed a handful of my hair, yanking my head back with a strength I didn't know she possessed. When I turned around, shocked, tears of pain in my eyes, she didn't slap me. She grabbed the phone from my hand. I had loosened my grip in the surprise of the hair pull, and instead of pocketing it, instead of throwing it across the room, she gripped it like a brick. She swung it with all her strength directly into my face. The impact was an explosion of white light and agony. The corner of the phone, the reinforced glass and metal casing, struck me directly on the mouth. I felt the skin of my upper lip split instantly, a hot, wet tear, but the deeper horror was the sound. A sickening crunch vibrated through my skull as my two front teeth shattered at the gum line. I stumbled back, hitting the refrigerator, my hands flying to my face, catching the blood that immediately began to pour out, thick and warm, choking me. me. I couldn't scream. My mouth was a ruin. I looked up, spitting blood and fragments of enamel onto the linoleum floor, and saw my mother standing there, breathing hard, the phone still in her hand. The screen was smashed, spider-webbed with cracks, stained with my blood. She didn't look horrified. She didn't drop the phone and rush to help me. She looked at the device, then at me, and said, in a voice that I will hear in my nightmares forever, "Look what you made me do. You broke it. Now nobody gets anything." The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by the sound of my own blood, dripping onto the floor. Drip, 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 and the ragged, wet gasps of my breathing. Bella stood by the sink, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide, but she didn't move to help me. She was paralyzed by the reality of violence she had instigated but never expected to witness. My mother, however, was already rewriting history in real time. She tossed the ruined phone onto the counter with a look of disgust, wiped a speck of my blood from her hand onto her apron, and looked at me with a terrifying, cold disappointment. "Go clean yourself up," she said, as if I had spilled milk rather than had my face caved in. "And don't you dare bleed on the carpet. This is what happens when you're stubborn, Daniel. You push and push until things break. Maybe now you'll learn." The gaslighting was instantaneous, a reflex to absolve herself of the assault she had just committed. She wasn't seeing a son in pain. She was seeing a mess she had to manage, an inconvenience caused by my refusal to comply. I stood there for a second, swaying, the shock beginning to wear off and replaced by a searing, blinding pain that radiated from my exposed nerves to my temples. I realized then, with a clarity that cut through the agony, that if I stayed in this house, I would die. Not today, maybe, but eventually. They would consume me until there was nothing left but a husk. I didn't say a word. I didn't argue. I turned around, grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, and walked out. My mother called after me, her voice rising in panic, not for my safety, but for her control. "Where are you going? You come back here. We need to discuss how you're going to replace that phone. You aren't walking out on this." I slammed the front door so hard the frame rattled, stumbling down the driveway to my rusted sedan, spitting blood into the grass. I got in, started the engine with trembling hands, and drove. I didn't know where I was going at first. I just knew I had to put pavement between me and the monsters in that kitchen. I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other holding the hem of my shirt to my mouth, the fabric quickly soaking through, driving until the suburban streets gave way to the highway, and then driving some more until I saw the blue H sign of a hospital. Walking into the emergency room was a surreal experience. The triage nurse took one look at me, a young man covered in blood, holding a rag to his face, shaking uncontrollably, and rushed me back immediately. When the doctor examined me, his face grew grim. I had 2 broken incisors, a deep laceration through my upper lip that would require stitches, and a hairline fracture in my maxilla. He asked me what happened, his pen hovering over the chart. I hesitated. The conditioning was deep. The voice in my head sounded like my father, telling me that family business stays in the family, that I shouldn't make a scene, that getting the police involved would ruin everyone's life. But then I tasted the copper again, felt the jagged edge of my broken tooth with my tongue, and remembered my mother's face, not sorry, but annoyed. "My mother," I said, the words garbled through my swollen lips. "She hit me with a phone. She smashed it into my face." The doctor stopped writing. He looked at me, then at the nurse. "I'm going to order a CT scan," he said gently, "and then we're going to call the police. Is that okay?" I nodded, and as I did, a tear leaked out and mixed with the blood on my face. It was the first time anyone had asked me if I was okay in 20 years. The police officer who took my statement was a large, soft-spoken man named Officer Miller, no relation, who listened without interrupting as I recounted the morning, the argument, the years of financial abuse, the culmination of violence. He took photos of my face, of the blood on my shirt, of the injuries that were undeniable proof of assault. He told me that this was a felony, that domestic battery with a weapon resulting in significant bodily harm was not a family dispute, it was a crime. He asked if I wanted to press charges. I thought about Bella in Tulum. I thought about my mother's bake sales. I thought about my father's silence. And then I thought about the $800 I had saved for that phone, the hours of lifting boxes in the heat, the sweat, the hope. "Yes," I said, "I want to press charges, and I want a restraining order." The next few days were a blur of pain medication, liquid diets, and sleeping on a friend's couch. My friend, a guy I knew from the warehouse named Marcus, took me in without question, giving me a safe harbor while the storm raged, and rage it did. My parents' reaction to the arrest warrant was nuclear. They blew up my phone, which I had managed to salvage the SIM card from and put into an old burner. Marcus lent me with voicemails that alternated between weeping pleas and vitriolic threats. My father left a message saying I was destroying the family name, that my mother was in a holding cell crying, that I was an ungrateful son who was ruining everything over an accident. Bella sent texts calling me a monster, saying she couldn't believe I would send our mom to jail, that I was dead to her, that I had ruined her life because now she definitely couldn't go to Tulum. I didn't respond. I listened to them once, saved them as evidence, and then blocked the numbers. The silence that followed was terrifying, but it was also peaceful. It was the silence of a tumor being removed. The legal process was slow and ugly. My parents hired a lawyer they couldn't afford, dipping into their retirement to defend my mother. They tried to paint me as the aggressor, claiming I had attacked Bella and my mother had acted in self-defense. But the physical evidence didn't lie. The angle of the blow, the defensive wounds on my hands, the lack of injuries on them, it all pointed to the truth. Plus, the text messages Bella had sent me about selling the phone, which I had backed up to the cloud, established the motive. The prosecutor was relentless. In the end, my mother took a plea deal to avoid a felony conviction that would have barred her from certain jobs, pleading guilty to aggravated assault. She was sentenced to probation, mandatory anger management classes, and ordered to pay restitution for my medical bills and the cost of the phone. The restraining order was granted for 5 years. Standing in the courtroom for the sentencing, watching my mother refuse to look at me, watching my father glare at me from the gallery, I realized that the bond was truly broken. There was no love there, only a transaction that had gone sour. I walked out of that courthouse with a temporary crown on my tooth and a scar on my lip, but for the first time in my life, I felt light. I moved into a small apartment with Marcus, picked up extra shifts at the warehouse, and focused on school. I never went back to the house. I never went back for my clothes, my books, my childhood photos. I left it all there as the cost of admission to my new life. 5 years have passed since that day. The scar on my lip has faded to a thin white line, hidden mostly by the beard I now grow, but I trace it sometimes when I'm thinking. A reminder of the price of freedom. My life is unrecognizable from the one I left behind. I graduated with my degree in design. I have a job at an agency that pays me well, and I have a phone that I bought myself, which sits on my desk safe and unbroken. I have friends who respect me, a partner who treats me with kindness, and a bank account that is mine alone. I hear things about them occasionally, through the small-town grapevine that never truly dies. I heard that Bella never went to Tulum. She never really went anywhere. She lives in the basement of my parents' house, working retail jobs. She quits every few months, still waiting for the world to discover her brilliance. My parents are drowning in debt, the legal fees and their own mismanagement finally catching up to them. My father had a heart attack last year, mild, but a warning, and I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't send flowers. I sent a card. No note, just a signature. It was more than they deserved. The vindication isn't in their suffering, though. I don't take joy in their ruin. The vindication is in the quiet Saturday mornings when I wake up and make coffee in my own kitchen, using a glass that I know won't be smashed in anger. It's in the ability to buy a plane ticket to a place I want to go, not because I demanded it, but because I earned it. It's in the realization that family isn't about blood. It's about who bleeds for you and who makes you bleed. They made me bleed, and in doing so, they taught me that I could survive the wound. I saw my mother once, about a year ago, at a grocery store in the next town over. She looked older, harder, her face etched with the bitterness of a victimhood she clings to like a shield. She saw me in the produce aisle, saw the man I had become, saw the peace in my eyes. She started to move toward me, her mouth opening to speak, perhaps to scold, perhaps to beg, perhaps to tell me she loved me in that twisted way of hers. I didn't run, I didn't hide. I simply turned my back on her and walked away, pushing my cart toward the future, leaving her in the past where she belongs. The teeth they broke are fixed now, ceramic and strong, better than the ones I was born with. The life they tried to break is fixed too, forged in the fire of that terrible morning. If you are reading this and you are holding onto a phone or a dollar or a dream that someone tells you that you don't deserve, hold tighter, don't let go. They can break your things, they can break your skin, but they can only break your spirit if you hand it to them. I kept mine, and I made sure they would never touch my life again. Thanks for reading my story. If you've ever had to walk away from toxic family to save yourself, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of survival. You aren't alone.